You know, you'd think an adult brain, like functioning at the absolute peak of human intelligence, is the ultimate pinnacle of neural density.
Right. You'd assume that.
Yeah, you'd think as we grow, we just, I don't know, add more and more computing power. But researchers at Oxford University actually completely flipped that assumption on its head recently.
They really did. It's fascinating.
They looked into the brains of newborn babies and found that a human infant actually has 41% more neurons than you do right now.
Yeah, 41%.
41%, which, I mean, it immediately makes you wonder, where did they go? Did we just, like, lose half our brain capacity by the time we hit our 20s?
Well, it sounds like a terrifying biological regression when you first hear it, you know?
Yeah.
You assume cognitive development is strictly additive.
Right, like learning means building more brain.
Exactly. But the biological reality of how we form habits, how we learn skills, and ultimately build a life is actually this really profound process of subtraction.
And that biological paradox is exactly why you are joining us today. So, welcome to the Deep Dive. We are thrilled you're here.
Absolutely.
Because today's mission is, well, arguably the most ambitious one we've ever tackled. We are constructing the ultimate operating system for a high-performance life.
It's a big goal, yeah.
It is. And to do that, we aren't just, relying on motivational platitudes. We are digging into the actual neuroscience of how you wire your brain for success.
We've got a really incredible stack of sources today.
We really do. We're pulling insights from behavioral psychology, clinical mental health guidelines from Sir Ganga Ram Hospital, comprehensive sleep architecture research from Healthline, academic studies on financial literacy from the IJFMR, and career development data from the University of Liverpool.
And of course, the core frameworks from Brendan Burchard's High Performance Habits.
Yes, exactly. But before we get into the mechanisms of all that, we need to set the foundational intention for what we're actually doing.
Right, because we need to be very clear here. Today is absolutely not about hustle culture. No.
Definitely not.
We are not here to glorify exhaustion or, tell you to just grind until you drop.
There's already enough of that out there.
Way too much.
Yeah.
The modern landscape is completely saturated with that kind of toxic productivity advice. What we are doing today is building a sustainable, structured foundation.
Right.
We are looking at the biological and psychological infrastructure you need to thrive without burning out. Because if you don't understand the underlying biology, like why you actually have fewer neurons now than when you were a baby, you just end up fighting against your own neurological architecture.
Okay, so let's unpack this right out of the gate. The phenomenon of losing 41% of our neurons. The researchers call it synaptic pruning.
Yes, synaptic pruning.
And the word pruning, it immediately makes me think of gardening. It sounds incredibly intentional.
That is the perfect way to look at it, actually. Yeah. It is an intensely deliberate biological process. To understand it, you have to look at how a baby experiences the world. So a synapse is simply the connection between two neurons, right? It's the pathway where electrical and chemical signals travel. When a baby is born, their brain is like an overgrown, incredibly dense forest.
It's totally wild.
Completely. It is overflowing with potential connections. They are taking in every sight, every sound, every texture without any filtering mechanism at all. Everything is a possibility.
Which I guess explains why babies are so easily overwhelmed and need to sleep all the time.
Yep.
Their brains are just processing absolutely everything at maximum volume.
Precisely. But because everything is a possibility, none of those connections are particularly strong or efficient. The brain is this massive energy consumer. It takes up about 20% of your body's resting metabolic energy, despite only being, about 2% of your body weight.
That's a huge energy draw.
It is. So maintaining billions of unused or weakly used synaptic connections is a massive waste of metabolic fuel. So as we age, the brain does something brilliantly resource efficient. It identifies the neural pathways you use frequently, and it physically strengthens them.
By insulating them.
Exactly. Yeah. Often wrapping them in a fatty substance called myelin, which acts like insulation on a copper wire, and that dramatically speeds up the signal.
And the ones you don't use.
It ruthlessly prunes them away. It just breaks the connection and reabsorbs the cellular material. That's synaptic pruning. The brain literally allocates its finite metabolic energy only to the skills, habits, and behaviors you practice repeatedly, while just letting the unused pathways wither and die.
I was trying to visualize this metabolic shift when I was reading through the behavioral psychology excerpts on habit formation. And it's like comparing a rough trek through an overgrown jungle to driving on a freshly paved multi-lane highway.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Like when you are trying to learn a brand new skill, say learning a new language or starting a completely new fitness routine, you are hacking your way through a dense jungle with a machete.
Yeah, it's incredibly slow.
It is slow. It requires a massive amount of conscious effort, and it is profoundly exhausting. You have to think about every single step.
Because there is no established neural pathway. The electrical signal is encountering immense biological resistance.
Right. But contrast that with a long-standing habit. Think about the route you drive to work or, typing on a keyboard or even just how you make your coffee in the morning.
You don't even think about it.
Exactly. Your brain has cleared the jungle. It has laid down thick asphalt. It has built a massive high-speed neural highway. You don't consciously think about it anymore because the signal travels at lightning speed with almost zero energy expenditure.
And what's fascinating here is that biological shift from jungle path to paved highway that is the fundamental basis of skill development and high performance.
Right.
Your adult brain is smarter and faster, not because it has more neurons, but because it has optimized its remaining networks specifically for the life you live.
But this brings up the critical challenge, doesn't it?
It does.
If we want to upgrade our operating system, we need to know how to intentionally pave new highways. We have to force the brain to allocate energy to new behaviors.
Which is notoriously difficult.
Oh, yeah. Anyone who has ever tried to stick to a New Year's resolution knows how hard it is to force the brain to pave a new road, which is where the concept of habit stacking comes in.
Yes, habit stacking.
This is a framework popularized by James Clear, and it actually originates from behavioral scientist B.J. Fogg's tiny habits methodology, right?
That's correct. Habit stacking is essentially a biological hack. It takes advantage of the fact that you already have thousands of highly efficient, fully paved neural highways in your brain.
The stuff we already do every day.
Exactly. Things you do every single day without fail. You don't have to build a new road from scratch, which, as we know, requires immense willpower. Instead, you just build a small off-ramp from an existing, well-paved highway.
The formula for this is almost deceptively simple. It goes like this. After or before my current habit, I will do my new habit. So the current habit is the highway. The new habit is the off-ramp. So after I pour my cup of coffee each morning, which is an undeniably paved highway for me, I will meditate for 60 seconds. Or after I sit down at the dinner table, I will say one specific thing I'm grateful for.
The brilliance of this formula is that it entirely bypasses the prefrontal cortex's reliance on raw willpower.
Because willpower burns out fast.
It really does. The prefrontal cortex is the logical decision-making part of your brain, and it gets fatigued very quickly. By linking a fragile, unformed new behavior to a rock-solid, deeply ingrained old behavior, the old habit acts as the undeniable cue. Your brain doesn't have to make a decision, it just follows the sequence.
Okay, but let me push back on this a little bit.
Sure.
Because I read this, and it sounds great in theory, but I see people try this exact stacking method and still completely fail. I've done it myself.
Most people do it first.
Yeah. Isn't it enough to just say, I'll meditate after work, or I'll read 10 pages of a book tonight? Why do we need to be so incredibly rigid and robotic about the exact phrasing of the formula? It feels almost overly engineered.
That is the exact trap most people fall into, and it is a crucial distinction. When you say, I will meditate after work, you feel like you are setting a habit stack, but biologically, you're introducing massive friction. Vague cues almost always fail because they require micro-decisions.
What do you mean by a micro-decision?
Well, if we look closely at the source material, James Clear gives a fascinating personal example of this exact failure. He decided he wanted to start a habit of doing push-ups. So he created a stack. He told himself, when I take a break for lunch, I will do 10 push-ups.
Which sounds totally reasonable. Lunch happens every day. It's an existing habit.
It sounds reasonable to the conscious mind, yeah. But to the basal ganglia, the part of the brain that actually executes habits, it is hopelessly ambiguous. Think about it. When exactly is a lunch break? Does it start the moment you feel hungry? Does it start when you stand up from your desk? Is it after you make the sandwich or after you finish eating it?
Oh, I see.
Because of that ambiguity, the brain has to pause and make a decision. It thinks, is now the right time? Maybe I'll just eat first and do them after. That tiny moment of hesitation, that friction, is the silent killer of habits.
Yeah.
The brain will almost always choose the path of least resistance. which is to do nothing.
Wow. Yeah, because the jungle path hasn't been paved yet, the brain takes any excuse to just stay on the easy highway of sitting there and eating.
Exactly. Clear noted that his push-up habit failed within a few days. So he had to engineer the ambiguity out of the system. He changed the stack to, when I close my laptop for lunch, I will do 10 push-ups next to my desk.
That's brilliant. The friction is entirely gone. Closing the laptop is a definitive, binary, physical action. It either happened or didn't.
It is an undeniable trigger. If the cue is fuzzy, the brain won't recognize it as a signal to fire the new sequence. The more tightly bound your new habit is to a specific, unmissable physical cue, the better the odds that your brain will successfully route the electrical signal down that new off-ramp.
Okay, so we know how to wire the system. We use highly specific habit stacking to pave the off-ramps and build the highways. But here's the reality check. To physically build those new neural pathways, to lay down that myelin and restructure the synapses, the brain needs incredibly high-quality physical and mental fuel.
Absolutely.
You simply cannot wire a tired, stressed-out, depleted brain. Which brings us to the actual engine of this high-performance operating system.
Yes, the energy engine. You can have the most intelligently designed habit stacks in the world. But if the underlying biology is starved of recovery or flooded with stress hormones, the whole system collapses.
Right.
And this biological cascade begins the literal second you open your eyes in the morning.
Which completely changes how I view my alarm going off, let me tell you. The clinical guidelines we have from the Department of Psychiatry at Sir Ganga Ram Hospital are extremely explicit about this. They state unequivocally, do not look at your smartphone for the first 30 to 60 minutes of the day.
And this isn't just about avoiding bad news or saving time. It is about actively managing your brain's endocrine system.
The hormones.
Exactly. When you wake up, your brain is transitioning from the slow delta waves of deep sleep into lighter alpha and eventually beta waves of alert consciousness. It is a delicate biological transition. When you instinctively reach over, grab your phone and open an email, a text message, or a news app, you're instantly violently forcing your brain into react mode.
It's essentially like waking up and having someone immediately start shouting demands and crises at you from the foot of your bed.
Biologically, your body cannot tell the difference between a stressful email and a physical threat in those early moments. Flooding your visual cortex and cognitive centers with external, demanding stimuli the second you wake up triggers an immediate spike in cortisol.
The stress hormone.
Cortisol is our primary stress hormone. It evolved to help us run from predators, not to answer late-night Slack messages.
So by checking your phone in bed, you are literally marinating your brain in fight-or-flight chemicals before your feet have even touched the floor.
You are inducing an artificial state of emergency. This causes your heart rate to elevate slightly, your breathing to become shallower, and your ambient anxiety to rise. You are burning massive amounts of cognitive fuel before the day has even begun.
Which is just a huge waste.
Huge. Bypassing screens for that first hour allows your brain to wake up organically, conserving that precious cognitive bandwidth for the deep work you actually want to do later.
But conserving energy by avoiding cortisol spikes is only the defensive side of the equation, right? We also have to actively recover our energy, and this is where we have to dive into what is arguably the most critical component of this entire deep dive.
Oh, without a doubt.
According to every single source we analyzed, from the mental health clinical guidelines to Healthline's comprehensive sleep architecture research, the absolute bedrock of human performance is sleep.
If sleep is compromised, everything else we discussed today is irrelevant. It is the single most vital habit, period.
And I think we all intellectually know that sleep is good for us. But the mechanism of why it is so necessary is mind-blowing. The Healthline research details something called the glymphatic system. I had never heard of this before. What is actually happening in our heads when we sleep?
This is one of the most remarkable discoveries in recent neuroscience. The body has the lymphatic system, which clears waste from your organs and tissues, but the brain is isolated behind the blood-brain barrier.
Right, it's walled off.
Exactly. So for a long time, scientists didn't fully understand how the brain got rid of its own cellular waste. What they discovered is that the brain has its own dedicated plumbing and waste disposal system, the glymphatic system.
Okay, let's unpack this. Waste disposal system. What kind of trash is the brain producing?
Well, simply by being awake and thinking, your neurons are burning energy and creating metabolic byproducts. One of these is a protein called beta amyloid, which interestingly is found in high concentrations in the brains of Alzheimer's patients.
Wow.
Throughout the day, these neurotoxins build up in the spaces between your brain cells. It's just the natural byproduct of cognitive function.
So just by being awake, my brain is slowly polluting itself.
Essentially, yes. Now, here is where it gets fascinating. During the day, the glymphatic system is largely dormant. But when you enter the deepest stages of non-REM sleep, your brain cells, specifically the glial cells, which support the neurons, they actually shrink. They physically reduce in size by up to 60%.
Wait, they physically shrink? Why?
To create space. By shrinking, they open up the fluid channels between the neurons. Then cerebrospinal fluid rushes through these widened channels, literally washing the neurotoxins and metabolic waste out of the brain tissue and flushing it into the circulatory system to be cleared by the liver.
That is wild.
It is a literal biological brainwash.
That is incredible. So if you cut your sleep short, or if you don't get enough deep sleep specifically, the glial cells don't shrink, the fluid doesn't wash through, and the trash just piles up in your brain.
Precisely. The neurotoxins remain. And the consequences of a toxic brain are immediate and severe. Without adequate deep sleep clearing that waste, the connection between your prefrontal cortex, the logical, regulating part of your brain, and your amygdala, the emotional primal center, becomes severed.
So the brakes get cut.
The brakes are completely gone. The amygdala goes into absolute overdrive. You become highly reactive to minor stressors, emotionally volatile, paranoid, and cognitively impaired. Your working memory degrades. Your ability to focus collapses.
So that's why sleep deprivation feels like emotional torture.
Yes, your brain is literally suffocating in its own metabolic waste.
Okay, so protecting this deep sleep isn't just about feeling rested. It is about physically preventing brain damage. Which leads us to the practical application. How do we protect it? Because knowing I need sleep usually just makes me stare at the ceiling feeling anxious about not sleeping.
Right, sleep anxiety is a real issue.
The Healthline data offers a highly structured framework for sleep hygiene. It's often referred to as the 10-3-2-1-0 rule. I want to walk through this very deliberately because the mechanics behind each step are profound.
It is a phenomenal framework because it addresses the biological, chemical, and psychological barriers to sleep sequentially. It begins 10 hours before bed. The rule is 10 hours before bed, no more caffeine.
See, 10 hours feels extreme to a lot of people.
It does.
If I go to bed at 10 p.m., that means no coffee afternoon. But I know so many people who swear they can have an espresso after dinner and fall asleep instantly. Are they just wired differently?
It is a very common misconception. People confuse falling asleep with achieving restorative sleep. Caffeine is an adenosine receptor antagonist.
A what?
Adenosine is a chemical that builds up in your brain all day, creating sleep pressure. It makes you feel tired. Caffeine doesn't magically remove the adenosine. It just blocks the receptors so your brain can't feel it.
So it just masks the exhaustion.
Exactly. Now, the half-life of caffeine is roughly 5 to 6 hours, which means a quarter of it is still circulating in your system 10 to 12 hours later. Even if a person can lose consciousness after an after-dinner espresso, clinical EEG monitoring shows that the circulating caffeine severely disrupts the architecture of their sleep.
It stops the deep sleep.
Right. It prevents them from entering those crucial deep sleep delta wave stages where the glymphatic system activates. A 2023 research review noted that late caffeine consumption can secretly reduce total actual sleep time by up to 45 minutes and completely decimate sleep efficiency. You wake up feeling exhausted, so you drink more coffee, and the cycle just deepens.
Okay, so to let the adenosine naturally do its job, we cut caffeine 10 hours out. What is the 3?
3 hours before bed. No more food and no more alcohol.
Okay, this is the one I have to push back on, or at least play devil's advocate for. The food part makes sense. You don't want indigestion. But the alcohol, a glass of red wine in the evening feels like the ultimate relaxation tool. It genuinely helps me and millions of others wind down and fall asleep faster. How is the data telling us it ruins rest?
You are absolutely right that it helps you fall asleep faster. Alcohol is a central nervous system depressant. It has a sedative effect, but again, sedation is not sleep.
Okay.
When you sedate yourself with alcohol, you essentially knock your brain out, but you completely hijack the natural sleep cycles.
What does the alcohol actually do to the cycle?
In the first half of the night, your body is busy metabolizing the alcohol.
Yeah.
During this time, it heavily suppresses REM sleep, which is the stage where your brain consolidates memories and processes emotional experiences. Then, in the second half of the night, as the alcohol clears your system, you experience what's called a REM rebound.
Which is...
Your brain panics and tries to cram all the missed REM sleep into a few hours. This causes highly fragmented sleep, vivid and often stressful dreams, increased body temperature, and frequent micro-awakenings. Furthermore, alcohol relaxes the musculature of the throat, drastically increasing symptoms of sleep apnea and snoring, which deprives the brain of oxygen. You are unconscious, but you are not recovering.
That is a brutal reality check. The sedation is a trap. All right, 10 hours, no caffeine, 3 hours, no food or alcohol. What is the 2?
2 hours before bed. No more work. This is the psychological component. You need to initiate a process called cognitive decoupling.
Cognitive decoupling. I like that phrase.
When you are working, especially on complex problems or responding to stressful emails, your sympathetic nervous system is engaged. You are in a state of vigilant arousal. You cannot expect your brain to go from 60 miles an hour to 0 in the 5 minutes it takes to brush your teeth.
Right.
The 2-hour buffer allows your cortisol levels to naturally drop and your mind to safely detach from the anxieties of the day.
Makes total sense. And then we reach the 1 hour before bed.
1 hour before bed. No more screens. No phone, no tablet, no television.
Because of the blue light.
Precisely. The mechanism here relies on the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain, which acts as your master biological clock. It regulates melatonin, the hormone that signals to your body that it is time to sleep. Throughout human history, as the sun set, the loss of blue light signaled the brain to flood the body with melatonin.
But screens mess that up.
Completely. When you stare at a brightly backlit screen at 10 p.m., the specific wavelength of that blue light travels through your optic nerve and tells your brain the sun is still up.
Yeah.
It aggressively suppresses melatonin production. It artificially delays your biological night.
So you are basically fighting your own endocrine system to fall asleep. And finally, the 0 in the 10-3-2-1-0 rule.
0 is the number of times you should hit the snooze button in the morning.
Ow.
Yep, waking up at a highly consistent time, 7 days a week, is the strongest anchor you can provide your circadian rhythm. Hitting snooze fragments the end of your sleep cycle and forces you to wake up during deeper stages of sleep, causing severe sleep inertia, that groggy, disoriented feeling that can take hours to shake off.
This framework is incredibly robust, but there was one piece of nuance in the research that I found fascinating regarding exercise. We all know physical activity is non-negotiable. The Ram Hospital guidelines note that exercise floods the brain with endorphins, dopamine, and serotonin. Healthline points out that just 150 minutes of moderate exercise a week dramatically improves sleep quality. But timing the exercise is a delicate balance, isn't it?
It is a critical variable. Regular exercise is phenomenal for clearing cortisol from the bloodstream. However, vigorous cardiovascular exercise has an acute stimulatory effect. It significantly elevates your core body temperature and spikes hormones like epinephrine and adrenaline.
So working out at night is bad.
If you do a heavy workout an hour before bed, your core temperature will be too high to allow for the natural drop required to initiate sleep, and your nervous system will be too agitated. You want to leave a buffer of at least 3 to 4 hours between intense exercise and your target sleep time.
Okay, so we've built the engine. We are utilizing the lymphatic system to flush the toxins. We are protecting our sleep architecture. But even with the most pristine sleep hygiene, the reality of a busy life is that the mid-afternoon slump is going to happen. Energy wanes. How do we actively generate energy during the day? Because this is where the insights from Brendan Burchard's research on high performers really caught my attention.
Burchard's core thesis here is a massive paradigm shift. Most people view energy as a finite battery that slowly drains throughout the day. They sit around waiting for motivation or joy to organically strike them. High performers do not do this. They realize that they operate like a power plant. They don't have energy. They consciously generate it.
Yes. And the tactical application he offers for this is brilliant. He introduces the concept of the door frame trigger. He suggests that every single time you walk through a doorway, which is a physical action, you perform dozens, maybe hundreds of times a day. You use that threshold as a physical trigger.
Right.
As you cross the frame, you tell yourself, I am entering the space as a positive force. I will find the good in this room. I am ready to serve. Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you look at the mechanics, this is habit stacking in its absolute purest, most elegant form.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
Let's look at the biology of what is happening. The current habit, or the undeniable physical cue, is the act of stepping through a door frame. The new habit is a conscious, deliberate, cognitive reframing. Think about the typical office worker. They leave a highly stressful, contentious meeting in a conference room. Without a trigger, they carry the ambient cortisol, the frustration, and the defensive posture straight into their next interaction. Or worse, straight through their front door to their family at the end of the day.
They let the momentum of the day drag them around.
Precisely. The door frame trigger acts as a circuit breaker. It forces the prefrontal cortex to momentarily pause, evaluate the emotional state, and consciously prime the specific emotions you want to experience in the new environment. You are taking active control of your psychological state rather than being a victim of circumstance.
You become the emotional thermostat for your own brain. And if the psychological trigger isn't enough and you are feeling physically drained, the clinical guidelines suggest an intervention called ecotherapy, which sounds a bit like something you'd do at a wellness retreat, but the data behind it is remarkably solid.
The term might sound novel, but the biological mechanism is deeply evolutionary. Ecotherapy simply refers to structured time spent in natural environments. The clinical data reveals that just 20 minutes outside, particularly among trees or nature, causes a profound shift in the autonomic nervous system.
What happens in those 20 minutes?
Your brain shifts from sympathetic dominance, the stress state, into parasympathetic dominance, the rest and digest state. Brain imaging studies show that time in nature actively decreases blood flow to the subgenual prefrontal cortex, which is the area of the brain heavily associated with rumination and repetitive negative thoughts. Your heart rate variability improves, and your circulating cortisol levels drop sharply. It is an immediate, natural reset for the nervous system, which stabilizes your energy rather than forcing you to rely on a roller coaster of caffeine and sugar to get through the afternoon.
So let's take a breath and look at where we are. We understand synaptic pruning. We have the specific friction-free neural wiring of our habit stacks. We have a massive, well-maintained engine fueled by protected deep sleep, managed morning cortisol, and actively generated daytime energy. But if you think about it, having a perfectly tuned engine and a wide-open highway doesn't do you any good if you don't have a steering wheel.
Exactly.
You have to know where you are driving. High energy without high clarity doesn't lead to success. It just leads to highly accelerated anxiety.
That is a critical observation. And it is the most common failure point for highly motivated people. They're moving incredibly fast, but in a completely random direction. Which brings us to the necessity of self-awareness and structured reflection.
To explore this, we turn to the career development resources from the Prosper portal at the University of Liverpool. Their research heavily emphasizes the practice of journaling as the primary tool for gaining this clarity, and they cite a wide array of benefits. It improves emotional regulation, reduces symptoms of anxiety, and enhances problem-solving skills.
The underlying mechanism here is something called cognitive offloading. Our working memory, the part of the brain that holds and manipulates temporary information, has a very strictly limited capacity. When you are carrying around abstract anxieties, unmade decisions, and vague goals in your head, they consume massive amounts of this working memory. It is like having 70 tabs open on an internet browser. The entire system slows to a crawl.
So journaling closes the tabs.
Exactly. The physical act of writing forces your brain to take abstract, chaotic, neuroelectrical signals and translate them into linear, structured language. By putting it on paper, you externalize the data. You offload it from your working memory, which immediately reduces the physiological feeling of being overwhelmed.
Okay, I understand the science of the offloading, but I have to play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener.
Go for it.
When I hear the word journaling, my mind immediately conjures an image of sitting quietly for an hour, staring out a window, writing pages and pages in a leather-bound book. Doesn't this take up way too much time? We are already asking the listener to get 8 hours of sleep, delay their coffee, exercise, and spend 20 minutes in ecotherapy. How does a busy professional fit this in?
That aesthetic vision of journaling is exactly what keeps most people from doing it. It feels like an insurmountable luxury of time. This is why the University of Liverpool resources bypass the lengthy diary entries and focus on highly accessible, hyper-structured micro-habits. Specifically, they advocate for a practice simply called just 3 things.
Just 3 things. How does that work in practice?
It is designed to take less than 3 minutes. At the end of your day, you open a notebook or an app, and you write down exactly 3 bullet points. That's it. It could be 3 things that went exceptionally well that day. It could be 3 things you enjoyed. Or, alternatively, 3 things that surprised you, or 3 specific challenges you faced. You get the thoughts out of your head and onto the page. But the actual power of this habit doesn't happen on day 1. The magic happens on the 5th day.
The review process.
The review process is where data becomes intelligence. After 5 days of doing this, you sit down and look back at the 15 data points you've collected. And you ask yourself critical questions. Do these items have anything in common? What patterns are emerging? Am I consistently energized by a certain type of task? Am I consistently drained or frustrated by a specific person or environment? By reviewing this microdata, you begin to map the architecture of your own psychology. You start to see what actually drives you, which allows you to make strategic, calculated adjustments to your life rather than guessing.
It's essentially tracking your emotional calories. If you don't record the data, you can't spot the trends. And speaking of strategy, this links perfectly to Burchard's research on how high performers maintain focus. He calls it seeking clarity. He found that while average people might occasionally reflect on who they currently are, high performers are obsessed with envisioning who they want to be.
It is the shift from a past-oriented analytical mindset to a relentlessly future-oriented design mindset. It is not enough to understand your present state. You have to actively construct a highly detailed, positive vision of your future self and then demand that your present behavior aligns with that future identity.
And Burchard provides a fantastic, actionable tip to bridge that gap. He challenges you to pick 3 aspirational words, 3 specific adjectives that describe the absolute best, most fully realized version of your future self. Maybe for you, it's compassionate, innovative, resilient, or maybe it's calm, present, bold. You select those 3 words and you set them as a label on a phone alarm that goes off 3 times a day.
This is a brilliant utilization of the brain's reticular activating system, or the RAS. The RAS is a bundle of nerves at our brainstem that filters out unnecessary information so the important stuff gets through. By consciously defining those 3 words and interrupting your day with them, you are programming your RAS to look for opportunities to embody those traits. When that alarm buzzes at 2 p.m. in the middle of a stressful afternoon, it is a hard interruption of your autopilot. It forces you to stop and ask, is my behavior in this exact moment aligning with the words calm, present, and bold?
It pulls you back to the steering wheel. And high performers don't just seek clarity regarding their character traits, they seek ruthless clarity regarding their skills. This is where we introduce the concept of the primary field of interest, or the PFI.
If we look at the broader landscape of career longevity, identifying a PFI is the differentiator between someone who is busy and someone who is impactful. A lot of highly driven people fall into the trap of becoming scattershot learners. They read a book on marketing, then take a weekend course on coding, then try to learn a bit of graphic design. They are dabbling. High performers do not dabble. They identify their primary field of interest, the core domain where they want to exert their influence, and they relentlessly, obsessively develop skills within that narrow corridor. They commit to being specialists.
Burchard refers to this specific, narrow focus as progressive mastery. It's a great term.
Progressive mastery is fundamentally different from just practicing. It is a highly structured, emotionally charged approach to skill acquisition. When you engage in progressive mastery, you aren't just logging hours. You are attaching extreme emotion and profound meaning to the learning journey. You are setting specific, uncomfortable stretch goals. You are socializing your learning by actively competing against or practicing with others, which raises the stakes. And the moment you achieve a goal, you immediately set a higher one so that you never hit a plateau of complacency.
Because emotion acts like a highlighter for the brain. The stronger the emotion attached to the practice, the faster the brain builds the myelin on that neural highway. So the takeaway here is that you have to choose your lane and then apply a relentless, emotionally charged focus to mastering it. But here is where we hit the massive reality check. Because we can talk about cognitive offloading and progressive mastery all day, but you might be listening to this thinking, this all sounds great, but I'm just trying to make rent. You can have the best morning routine on earth, you can have your 3 words buzzing on your phone, but if you are drowning in ambient financial stress, your brain simply does not have the working memory left to innovate.
That is the hard biological truth. Financial instability is not just a math problem. It is a severe, chronic physiological stressor. It operates constantly in the background, like a computer program draining your battery. It keeps your cortisol levels perpetually elevated, which, as we discussed, degrades the prefrontal cortex and heightens amygdala reactivity. You cannot achieve prolific creative output or progressive mastery if your nervous system is paralyzed by the quiet panic of unstructured debt or living paycheck to paycheck. The cognitive load is simply too heavy.
Which is exactly why we included the academic study from the International Journal for Multidisciplinary Research, the IJFMR. They look specifically at the impact of financial literacy on the spending habits of young adults. And the statistics they uncovered are, frankly, staggering. They found that 62% of the respondents had never received any kind of formal financial education. Not in high school, not in college, nowhere.
It is a systemic educational failure that leaves people biologically and psychologically defenseless. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, when you overlay that lack of education onto the modern economic landscape, it becomes a crisis. We are currently living in a highly digitized, hyper-engineered financial environment that is explicitly designed to bypass our logical brains.
You mean the lack of friction, one-click buying.
Precisely. The digital economy has successfully engineered all the friction out of spending money. Think about the physical act of handing over a $100 bill. Your brain registers that loss. It feels a slight pang of pain. But today, it's one tap on a phone screen using facial recognition. It's buy now, pay later algorithms integrated seamlessly into every checkout page. It is algorithmic targeted advertising combined with easy, unsecured credit. Without a foundational structured understanding of budgeting, compound interest, or the mathematical reality of debt management, human beings are uniquely vulnerable to these systems. The IJFMR study explicitly concludes that this lack of education leads directly to impulsive dopamine-driven buying decisions and vicious compounding debt cycles.
The modern economy essentially preys on our brain's desire for an instant dopamine hit, exploiting the lack of financial highways we never built. But the flip side is also heavily documented in the study. When people do manage to build those financial habits, the psychological relief is undeniable. The survey found that only 13% of respondents actually track their expenses on a daily basis. About 33% do it monthly. But a massive 80% of them universally agree that having financial knowledge and tracking their money directly helps them make better, less impulsive spending decisions.
Because knowledge translates into capability. But, and this is crucial, abstract knowledge must be transformed into concrete behavior. Understanding compound interest doesn't help you if you don't know where your paycheck went. Tracking your expenses is the absolute foundational behavior of financial literacy.
I used to always compare tracking expenses to tracking calories when you're trying to lose weight. You cannot manage what you do not measure. But based on our conversation today, I think a better way to look at it is through the lens of cognitive offloading. When you don't track your money, your brain is subconsciously trying to keep a running tally of your bank account. Did I spend too much at dinner? Can I afford this subscription? That ambient calculation is stealing your working memory. When you track the expense, you offload the anxiety onto a spreadsheet. You free up the bandwidth. And habit stacking is the perfect mechanism to build this. After I buy a coffee, I will immediately log the $4 in my app. Or, before I sit down to watch Netflix on a Sunday night, I will review my bank transactions for 10 minutes.
By taking the structural tools we discussed in segment 1, the habit stacking, the elimination of ambiguity, and applying them to your finances, you neutralize the ambient stress. You take back control of your dopamine reward circuits. This clears the psychological bandwidth that is absolutely necessary for the high-level performance we are trying to achieve.
And once you clear that bandwidth, something incredible happens. You suddenly have the capacity to tap into a much deeper, much more powerful well of motivation. In High Performance Habits, Burchard talks about a concept he calls raising necessity. What is the mechanism behind that? Because it sounds intense.
It is intense by design. Necessity is the emotional and psychological drive that transforms excellent performance from a mere preference into an absolute non-negotiable must. Think about the difference between wanting to do a good job on a presentation because you'd like a promotion versus feeling a visceral, internal, and external obligation to deliver at the highest possible level. High performers don't rely on the hope of success. They actively engineer environments and psychological triggers where they need to succeed.
But how do you manufacture that feeling? Because I can't just sit at my computer, snap my fingers, and suddenly feel an overwhelming life or death need to write a quarterly report. It doesn't work like that.
You're right. You can't fake it. Which is why high performers use highly specific psychological triggers to connect mundane tasks to deep emotional values. The desk trigger is a phenomenal example of this mechanism in action.
Right. I love this in the text. The desk trigger is so simple but so heavy. The rule is, the moment your physical body hits the chair at your desk, that is the undeniable physical cue, you ask yourself one specific focusing question. Who needs me on my A game the most right now?
Notice what that question does. It immediately shifts your cognitive focus away from your own internal state. It pulls you out of your fatigue, your boredom, or your minor frustrations, and it anchors you to a sense of duty, service, and external obligation. Whether the answer is your team, your most difficult client, your spouse, your children, or even the future version of yourself, connecting the immediate boring task in front of you to a human being who relies on your competence instantly raises the psychological stakes. It forces your brain to elevate its effort.
It weaponizes your empathy for productivity. Another way to raise those stakes, according to the research, is by affirming your goals socially. Burchard points out that true high performers do not keep their massive ambitions a secret. They actively tell the people around them exactly what they are attempting to do.
There is a deep evolutionary psychological mechanism at play here, the need for identity congruence. When you speak your boldest goals out loud to your peers, your colleagues, or your family, you are intentionally putting your ego and your reputation on the line. You're manufacturing a social consequence for failure or laziness. The human brain hates the discomfort of cognitive dissonance, the gap between what we say we are and what we actually do. So by stating the goal publicly, your brain will drive you to perform better simply because you've created a social environment that demands your actions align with your stated identity.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and take stock of the incredible machinery we have built so far. We started at the cellular level, understanding how our brains prune synapses to conserve metabolic energy, and we learned how to bypass willpower by paving high-speed habit highways with specific, friction-free triggers. We built a massive energy engine by honoring the glymphatic system with the 10-3-2-1-0 sleep rule, managing our morning cortisol by avoiding screens and actively generating daytime energy through doorframe triggers and ecotherapy. We grabbed the steering wheel by utilizing cognitive offloading through journaling, programming our reticular activating system with 3 aspirational words, and committing to progressive mastery in our primary field of interest. We faced the brutal reality check of ambient financial stress, proving that we must track our resources to free up working memory, and we learned to manufacture necessity. And finally, we explored how to execute prolific quality output by identifying our 5 moves, acting as an emotional thermostat to influence the world around us, and leading with courage despite the fear.
It is a comprehensive, biologically grounded system for sustained elite performance. But before we conclude this deep dive, looking at all of this structure raises one final, highly important question for you to consider. What happens when our habit stacks become too rigid? We have spent the last hour extensively detailing how to script your day from the exact minute of your morning light exposure to your highly specific desk triggers to tracking every dollar. But if we script every single minute of our biological and psychological lives, do we inadvertently engineer out the chaotic serendipity that leads to true paradigm-shifting innovation? As you build your high-performance life this week, I want to offer a challenge. Leave exactly 1 hour of your week completely unstacked. Give your beautifully optimized, neurotoxin-free brain 60 minutes of absolute unstructured freedom and simply observe where it decides to go on its own.
I love that. Unstructured time is the ultimate luxury of a highly structured life. Structure creates the space for true freedom. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found the biological tools and the psychological frameworks you need to upgrade your operating system. Don't wait for the new year or even for tomorrow. Start laying the asphalt for your first new neural highway today. Keep exploring.